these off or down. Let me just kill this. Okay. Is our robot going to say anything? Or
support the call to men killer robots.
awesome.
It's time to launch negotiations to men killer robots. Stop hashtag killer robots. Don't build fully autonomous weapons.
Good morning. Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this press briefing by the campaign to stop killer robots. My name is Mary Wareham. I work for Human Rights Watch in the Arms Division, and it's my great honour to coordinate the campaign, which currently is comprised of 130 non-governmental organizations in 60 countries around the world. We aspire to create a broad-based movement that will create so much pressure that the governments launch negotiations on a new international treaty to prohibit weapon systems that would select and engage targets without meaningful human control. Such fully autonomous weapons are also called lethal autonomous weapon systems at the talks in Geneva. And we believe that they cross the threshold of acceptability and therefore must be prohibited. So we have two speakers today. He'll just make some brief remarks and then we'll move to Q&A. The first speaker will be Liz on my right. Liz O'Sullivan is the Technology Director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. She's also a member of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, which is in turn a co-founder of the campaign to stop killer robots. You can read the rest of Liz's bio on, we've distributed that, right? Okay. And then we'll hear from Jodie Williams, who I'll introduce perhaps after Liz. Okay.
Hi, thank you, everybody. So I've been working in the field of AI for around 8 years. I started about 6 years ago working for a natural language processing company. And I've seen the field develop quite rapidly into what some may think are realms where these algorithms are able to make decisions that seem to be sometimes magically correct. But as somebody who ran a computer vision department which focused on the annotation of labeled data, which means in order to build these algorithms, we had to first create very large data sets of photos that contained labels associated with those photos that tell the computer what they're actually looking at. In my experience at a computer vision startup where I was for about 2 years, I can tell you firsthand that these algorithms find new and spectacular ways to fail. And in so many ways, they do it such that humans just simply can't understand what went wrong, what they need to do to correct it, or how to fix the problems. In my experience at Clarify, that was where I first learned about Project Maven, which is a computer vision project claiming to be non-offensive that attempts to identify what is in an area from an aerial perspective, ostensibly through drones. And it was only until I figured out, by putting 2 and 2 together, that this technology could also be used for the purpose of building autonomous weapons, that I asked our CEO to sign the famous pledges and promise never to contribute towards what I saw as potentially a weapon of mass destruction, something that could create a lot of oppression and suffering under authoritarian regimes. And I was very shocked to hear when I asked this question that he refused to sign the pledge and told us that our work would be used for this end. This was very distressing for me, but also it signifies a broader movement within the tech workers community where people are joining forces and working together with organizations like the Tech Workers Coalition and the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots to try to prevent our work from being repurposed towards these nefarious ends. And it wasn't until I quit this position that I joined the campaign to stop killer robots and have since devoted my expertise and my life to pursuing an international ban on autonomous weapons for any further use by governments, nations, or any other organizations that seek to use them. And part of the reason I feel this way is because of the notion of algorithmic bias, which is problematic and unavoidable when you think about how AI algorithms are trained. If we allow autonomous weapons to deploy and select and engage with their own targets, we will see disproportionate false fatalities, error rates with people of color, people with disabilities, anybody who has been excluded from the training sets by virtue of the builder's own inherent bias. And I don't think that we as a community, as a global international community, want to disproportionately target vulnerable communities, especially under the guise of authoritarian regimes. Since quitting that role, I have devoted much of my time and my experience to the campaign and to other organizations who are working to fight for these same goals, and we won't stop until we all work together to achieve this ban under international humanitarian law. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. So our second speaker is Jody Williams, who I have had the great pleasure to work with for the last 20 years, longer actually. We worked together on the international campaign to ban landmines back in 1996, which resulted in the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty. And for that work, Jody received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997, along with the ICBL. So she has continued to dedicate her life to peace and justice, co-founding the Nobel Women's Association, which is the Nobel Women's Initiative, which is based in Ottawa. Yeah. It's okay. We'll just put it up and we'll be quiet. It's okay. Anyway, so Jody is here. She is one of the co-founders of the campaign to stop killer robots. Indeed, she was one of the people who came up with this idea. And I'll let her explain why. No, okay.
Sure. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Liz. It's really a pleasure to be here with these two women who are doing and have done so much to try to help people understand why killer robots or lethal autonomous weapon systems, whatever you wish to call them, are crossing a moral and ethical Rubicon and should not be allowed to exist and be used in combat or any other way. I firmly believe that as the military progressed from drones to trying to create autonomous weapon systems that could target and kill, that they thought it would kind of slip under the radar, just the same way drones did. Drones started out as, surveillance equipment, and then suddenly they stuck on some Hellfire missiles, and then they were, killer weapons. I think that they were hoping and really expecting that the larger community would not find out about the research and development of killer robots. But many people were already aware, particularly the computer robotic community, the techie community, about what was being done. And we were happy to be able to join together to create the campaign to stop killer robots, which was launched in 2013. But to me, Liz is an example of the more people know about this weaponry, the more they do not want to see it unleashed on this planet. Since we started the campaign, which was a handful of non-governmental organizations, we're now 100, I gotta look. 130. Every time I talk to Mary, there are more NGOs in the campaign, 130 in 60 countries, trying to educate people to the, let's call a spade, the evil of allowing weapons to target and kill human beings. I was recently at a Vatican seminar on the digital age, artificial intelligence, and the common good. This is the second time I have participated in a Vatican seminar dealing with weapon systems. And the increased concern by the Vatican and the Pope himself is another example to me of the response of people once they learn about how these weapons would function, that makes it so important that this campaign continue to grow and continue to educate and continue to pressure so that we will not see killer robots unleashed on the world. Nobody has any idea how they actually would react. Somebody said, maybe it even was you, Liz, that there's no way to test them until they actually engaged in combat. And then we have no idea how they would react. One thing at the Vatican seminar, there was a small workshop of 20 of us specifically looking at killer robots. And every single person in that workshop by the end, except for one, believed that there should be a complete ban on killer robots or weapon systems that operate without meaningful human control. And one participant in that seminar or in our workshop said, as I think about it, killer robots would actually be both the weapon and the combatant. I'm sure we've thought of this before, but it particularly struck me. These are weapons that would be both the weapon that would kill and the combatant as well. I'll end with just the woman who is the head of Mozilla and other tech people were at this seminar, and she talked about the mentality of the tech industry, and that they just have to produce more and more and more because of the hideously competitive nature of the development of tech, and that part of what we are trying to do is take a deep breath, people. Take a deep breath. We need to step back and think about how artificial intelligence, robotic weapon system would affect this planet and the people living on it. And so we're trying to help make them step back and take a deep breath. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. So we're here in New York because First Committee on Disarmament and International Security is happening right now. There is no resolution specifically on killer robots that is being debated, but it's a key place where we can reach a lot of diplomats from a lot of countries that we do not see in Geneva, where the diplomatic talks have been taking place since 2014. So after this event, we'll go down and brief the governments. Questions?
Thank you very much for this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Welcome and thank you for doing this briefing. I have 3 questions. First, is anybody actually drafting or working on an international treaty, which is your goal? Secondly, what countries are most advanced in developing these type of weapons? I assume the United States is, but I assume there are probably others. And have you all had discussions with military experts in key countries, and what has their reaction been? Thank you.
Those are excellent questions. Okay. Is anyone drafting the treaty? There is a lot of discrete work happening behind the scenes at the moment by, I think, various states as well as our NGO coalition. We're all unpacking this notion of meaningful human control and what it would look like in a treaty. So we're thinking and talking about this quietly, but there are not yet negotiations. And this is why we are here, is to call for the launch of negotiations on the treaty to ban killer robots and retain meaningful human control over the use of force. I guess the governments will come together next month at the Convention on Conventional Weapons, the CCW, in Geneva, and they'll decide on the 15th of November what to do next year, what to recommend the multilateral response be. And you might have attended the Alliance for Multilateralism event here last month at the United Nations General Assembly that France and Germany convened. That event identified killer robots as one of the 6 major international threats requiring a strong multilateral response. And they issued a declaration which basically calls for the development of a normative framework. We're not quite sure what a normative framework is. It sounds good, doesn't it? Russia isn't either. And so Russia has put those words into square brackets. So we're expecting a bit of a fight in Geneva next month. And this is the basic problem. The vast majority of countries want to move forward to launch the negotiations, but they're being held back by, to answer your second question, the countries who are most far advanced in terms of investing in fully autonomous weapons. At the last diplomatic meeting in August, Russia and the United States were the key problems. They did not want to see any result from what we could tell. Other countries that are investing heavily into ever increasingly autonomous weapon systems include China, South Korea, Israel, the United Kingdom to some extent, perhaps Turkey, perhaps Iran. It's very hard to determine exactly the state of investments into this technology, but I think it is abundantly clear that we are moving very swiftly in the direction of fully autonomous weapons, which is why we've been calling on the diplomacy to speed up here. You've been talking about this concern since 2014, have learned an awful lot in that process, but now it's time for the rubber to hit the road. We have to decide what to do. So yes, the talks in Geneva involve a lot of military experts, as well as lawyers. We're there because we're allowed in every part of the meeting as civil society. We're treated seriously. We can address the delegations. And that's the kind of current status of where we are right now. So we're confident that negotiations will be launched, but that's not going to happen unless there is strong political will, political leadership from key countries. And this is why we're here at the United Nations with our robot, why there was a Killer Robots episode on Madam Secretary last night. We're starting to turn our attention to speaking to the public and to explaining this challenge and to seeing if we can bring countries on board that way, because we really see a need for the debate. Did I just...
I'd like to...
Okay, so Jody will just add one thing and then we'll take...
I feel like making a statement of the obvious that anybody who covers the United Nations is more than well aware of. At the CCW in Geneva, of course, they actually seem to seek the lowest common denominator. And I have often said personally that it's dictatorship of one. It is quite appalling that in a conference of states where the overwhelming majority want to move forward on an issue, as in this case, debating what they should do in terms of a treaty to prohibit killer robots without meaningful human control, that any single state can make that not happen. There is something wrong with a system that allows one state to stop negotiations on issues that are of deep concern to the entire planet. As you all probably know as well, we tried very hard to negotiate the Landmine ban treaty within the CCW. Same with cluster munitions. And we had the same result as we're seeing now, a handful of states trying to make sure nothing happens. So, as Mary talked about negotiating, we'll see where that will happen.
Just as a quick follow-up, Does that mean you could actually go out of the UN system again as you did with the Landmine Treaty?
Certainly. This is why I was in Japan last month. I met with the foreign minister. I said, why can't Japan launch the Tokyo process to ban killer robots as the nation who wants to use robots for peaceful purposes and who says it has no plans to develop lethal autonomous weapon systems. This is what we're looking for, is the bold political leadership. We had that with Canada's Foreign Minister, Lloyd Axworthy, on landmines, with Norway's Foreign Minister on cluster munitions. Who's going to lead us to the treaty to ban killer robots? We need that leadership now. So,
Can I just, I'm sorry. I have to say something. When I was just at the Vatican, I was able to have a meeting with the Vice Minister of Defense and also pushed that Italy, who say they have no intention of fielding killer robots, if that is their sincere belief, why can't they join with others in taking a lead on this issue? Countries need to come together in a core group that are willing to take on the big guys, so to speak.
Thank you. Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. First of all, could you tell us how far along is the technology for killer robots? Are we still in the prototype stage? Is it gone beyond that in actual testing in the, quote, field? And secondly, you alluded to this in your comment before. Could you at least conceptualize what you mean by meaningful human involvement or intervention? What would that look like? Thank you.
okay. Would you like to take the first one?
Sure. I'm happy to answer that. So in order to create a lethal autonomous weapon system, you would need to have several pieces of technology, one of which would be a piece of technology that allows for the weapon system to make those decisions without access to internet. Those already exist. Another thing would be collaborative swarm flying. This already exists as well. The piece that is much hotly debated right now is computer vision targeting systems by use of a technology called object localization. This already exists. It works fairly well today. There is absolutely nothing stopping a nation or any group of people from creating their own version of fully autonomous weapons systems today. They wouldn't work very well. They might not be safe, but they certainly do exist, and this is only information that's available to us as the public. The assumption is also that other countries have technologies that are classified that will be available, won't be available to civil society, but that will be able to, again, select, engage, and destroy targets of their own choosing. So that's what worries me, is that these killer robots, as we lovingly call them, aren't a future problem anymore. They're possible today, and they're something that we need to work to control right now.
Indeed, I think the one thing that is holding back the fielding and use of fully autonomous weapons is our campaign and is the way that we are stigmatizing the removal of meaningful human control from the use of force. In essence, the campaign to stop killer robots is calling for the status quo, which is what we have right now, and asking why we have to go down the dark path of killer robots. The campaign to stop killer robots since the very beginning has called for a preemptive ban, which means future weapon systems rather than the ones that exist today. But there are certainly, I would say, prototypes, testing, and there are several weapon systems that raise a lot of serious questions for us. We've heard a little bit about the swarm technology, which the United States and China are developing. That technology, from what we can tell, is not weaponized yet. Again, it's, I think, surveillance purposes and other kind of more benign uses that is being discussed. And this concept of meaningful human control is, I think, a critical one. It shows how over the course of the last 8 meetings since 2014 on killer robots, at every single meeting, we return to the touchstone of human control. And this will only be unpacked in the treaty negotiations. But you hear other countries like the United States talking about appropriate levels of human judgment. We hear the words effective human control. So this is where the debate is centered. We certainly have a concept in our mind in the campaign to stop killer robots, and I'll just read, it's a little bit wonky. Such a treaty should apply to the range of weapon systems that select and engage targets on the basis of sensor inputs. That is, systems where the object to be attacked is determined by sensor processing rather than by humans. It should prohibit systems that would not allow for meaningful human control and should establish positive obligations to ensure that other ones are appropriately constrained. So it's up to governments to decide where to draw the line once they enter the negotiations, and this is where we'll solve the definition problem that you might have heard talked about before. But meaningful human control is, I think, in essence, an on-the-loop weapon system where it is possible for the human to intervene, to recall, where there is at least some form of deliberation on the attack. We hear some governments talking about how meaningful human control could be good programming, and I'm sure that will be part of it, but we're very much focused on the actual use of the weapon system and how it would be able to select and identify a target and then fire on it without any further human intervention. There was a question over here. I don't know, sorry, I'm not very good at this. Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi, and my question is to Ms. Judy Williams about assessment of her campaign about the Landmine Treaty. Where do we stand now? How much achievement happened in the last about 25 years since you got the Nobel Prize, 23 years, I think. And are you expanding now your activities on disarmament to include the robot killer and other issues? Thank you very much.
I'm the chairwoman of the Nobel Women's Initiative, which brings together 6 women recipients of the Peace Prize. And we use our influence and access to highlight the work of grassroots women in zones of conflict. I have been that chair since 2006, since we launched. The Nobel Women's Initiative is one of the founding organizations of this campaign. So we are very deeply involved in what is happening with the campaign to stop killer robots. Regarding landmines, since I've been the chair of the Nobel Women, I'm only kind of peripherally involved. But to me, one of the reasons why this campaign to ban landmines has been so stunningly successful is because the campaign continues to exist. We knew that if the campaign disbanded immediately upon the achievement of the words on paper, the beautiful words of the treaty, that nothing would happen. Words are beautiful, but if any treaty, any law is not implemented, it is not worth the words on the paper. And the campaign has been very diligent in pushing for further universalization. Last I knew, it was 164 countries.
Correct.
That are part of the Mine Ban Treaty. Last I knew, and I have people in the room who know way more than I do and will happily correct me, there were over 50 million stockpiled mines that were destroyed and never in the ground to kill and maim. Some 36 countries have completed mine clearance. So I would say pretty much on every measure, it has been one of the most successful disarmament treaties in the world.
Maybe just to say the annual Landmine Monitor report by the International Campaign to Ban Landmines will be issued on the 21st of November, and that's the week before the 4th review conference of the Landmine Treaty, which will be held in Oslo, Norway, where it was negotiated back in September 1997. We need more countries to join. Egypt still is not on board, and other states in the Middle East. Of course, the United States, China, and Russia. But again, the stigma that has been created against anti-personnel landmines is what carries that treaty forward.
The U.S.
Right.
hasn't, I would mention the U.S. hasn't used them. Or
Yeah, and we can talk about the United States has not exported landmines in more than 25, 30 years almost, has not used them in more than a decade, has committed not to produce. So we see the successes there, but I think one of the biggest challenges is non-state armed groups and the use of improvised landmines, which is often called improvised explosive devices. So...
Thank you. I'm Mario Villar with EFE, the Spanish news agency. Just to follow up on the technology, if you can explain to us how do you expect the systems to be utilized? Are we talking of drones that are going to be able to select their targets and attack? Are they going to be used in any range of weapons? Thank you.
Hi. So I've been following this very closely. It seems like every branch of the military is working on their own versions of these kinds of weapons. There are autonomous boats that will potentially have the ability to fire. There are autonomous drones that will accompany planes, as wingmen is one of the terms that I'm seeing quite a lot in the RFPs, and also vehicles as well, where the easiest technological problem to solve is through the drones. So I feel that's most likely what we'll see first, and then the rest as technology advances as well.
So, I mean, perhaps just to discuss what a drone is, it's a remotely piloted vehicle that is, in some cases, armed. It still has a human controlling it. They might not be in the cockpit of the vehicle, but they're back in a base taking that decision. If the target they're going to fire on is legitimate, and then pressing the button. So for us, it's crossing the moral line part that we are deeply concerned about, and that's the trend towards autonomy in weapon systems, and we see it all around us today in the investments that are being made.
can I add something?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Humans are, in theory, moral beings. And the laws of war are, laws designed by moral beings for moral beings. A machine is not a moral anything. It's a machine. So allowing machines to, in theory, through algorithms, decide what they will target and what they will attack is one of the huge reasons why we consider it to be crossing the Rubicon and grossly unethical and immoral. Machines should be in the service of human beings. Human beings should not be in the service of machines. Killer robots, as I understand how they would like to see them, with perhaps one pilot overseeing a swarm of 100 fighter jets, how could that one human being possibly control what those weapons do? It is totally impossible. Meaningful human control means that a human being is making the target and control the target and kill decision, period.
Okay, Sarah, and then behind.
Thank you very much. My name is Talal Haj from Al Arabiya News Network. Is it feasible to expect a ban treaty by 2021, or is that too ambitious? And can't you find a country or a few countries to start the ball rolling like you did in the case of the landmine?
So there's 29 countries, right? Okay, thank you. 29 countries are now calling for a ban on fully autonomous weapons. 8 of them are from the Middle East. The first one to call for a ban was Pakistan. It said basically, as the victim of armed drones, if this is what's coming next, we want no part of that. What we see is strong support across the developing world for the goal of creating new law, creating a new treaty. But we know it has to be a global effort, and therefore we are working very hard at the parliamentary level in European countries to secure the support in Japan, in Australia, elsewhere. We want to have a treaty that's got as universal as possible, and therefore it has to be led by a group of states that is as diverse as possible. And we still need the leadership to step in here and help with that process. You know, there's several different ways to negotiate an international treaty. One way would be at the Convention on Conventional Weapons. There are 5 protocols. You add a 6th protocol. It's a no-brainer. You've got all of the right states there. But they're unable to produce a result, a credible outcome, in our view. So that leaves 2 options. One is to come here to the United Nations General Assembly, launch a resolution that, launches the process to negotiate the treaty. The other way is, as we discussed earlier, the Ottawa process to ban landmines, the Oslo process. You do not have to negotiate a treaty within the United Nations, but you roll it back in at the end. We want to keep all pathways open at this point.
I may just follow
Sure.
up. Even with the resistance of big countries, the big cats, United States and Russia, how do you rate your chances of achieving the ban?
Well, these were the same questions that we heard in the Landmine campaign, and obviously recognizing that $1 billion worth of killer robots is very different from a landmine. But people fixated on, what if the U.S. and Russia and China don't join the mine ban treaty? Will it make a difference? It has made a massive difference in the world, and those countries are obeying many parts of it because of the stigmatization. If you have wishy-washy limits of how you should use them, etc., you will never get stigmatization that ultimately leads countries to give up the weapons, which is what the 2017 nuclear weapon ban treaty is counting on. Stigmatization and forcing the countries to do what they should have done decades ago. And I think that we would certainly love to have the United States for once lead a charge on getting rid of these weapons before they ever exist. But I would not hold my breath. There are plenty of other countries on the planet, and their desires and wants are equally important, even though my country may not believe it.
We often hear that killer robots are inevitable. We view a treaty as inevitable. It's just a matter of how it will be negotiated, when it will be negotiated. 2021 is far away. We know how much can happen in 2 years and technological developments. I guess in diplomatic terms, they're like, that's tomorrow. But for us, that's far too far. They should be launching negotiations in November when they come back to negotiate the mandate. Sir, behind you.
Thank you. My name is Sato from Japan TV NHK. 2 questions. One is about the tech companies' response to your campaign, Killer Robot campaign. Like you said, that some tech companies is already aware from the engagement in the U.S. military. But of course, that there are some companies still stick to the profitable new potential in making the AI technology. So in general, how the U.S. tech company, including the gigantic tech companies, respond to your campaign. One more question is about Japanese commitment. You just mentioned about the Japanese role to play in terms of the killer robot campaign. So what do you expect more Japan to play?
Okay. Do you want to? Sure.
So I would say that the opinions of rank-and-file tech workers on this issue tend to be very, very favorable for the campaign to stop killer robots. We have lots of members. I see these stickers on laptops wherever I go, no matter which company I'm visiting. But it's important to remember that we are exerting what little power we have against tech executives who have quite a lot more. And these big companies do have a way of competing with each other to get large government contracts. There is a ton of money in it, and it's difficult to turn down a $10 billion contract that involves, DoD computing for the cloud. And these are the kinds of things that we're seeing, which makes it that much more troubling for all of us who don't want to participate in killer robots or autonomy in weapon systems at all, to find employment outside of these big tech firms where they're working on these issues without much concern around the dual-use nature of these technologies. Just yesterday, we were around the city trying to hold these companies accountable, and we're going to continue to work from within these organizations and from outside to try to make sure that they do the right thing.
Google, in June last year, issued these ethical principles which commit the company not to design or deploy artificial intelligence for use in weapon systems. We welcomed that pledge. We're going to hold Google to it. They dropped Project Maven. There is still a whole host of other challenges with that major corporation, but I think they gave us something to then go back to Microsoft and Intel and the other major tech companies. They cannot sit on the sidelines here. They have to take a stand as well. Just on Japan, our experience with Japan has been positive. Japan acknowledged the humanitarian devastation that was being caused by landmines and broke from the United States and joined the Mine Ban Treaty and has since been one of the most vigorous advocates, pouring millions of dollars into mine clearance. We need more on victim assistance. Japan also did not go along with the U.S. on cluster munitions. And so we believe that Japan can forge an independent path forward. And what I said to the foreign minister is you've got an unprecedented opportunity here to prevent a humanitarian tragedy from occurring before it happens. Japan didn't have that opportunity with nuclear weapons. So we're trying to prevent another Hiroshima or Nagasaki from occurring. And autonomy can, of course, be used in nuclear weapons, which is a major concern for our colleagues in the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. So we really hope that Japan will step forward here and seize some leadership on the issue. And of course, the foreign minister had advice for me as well. He said, I need to be hearing from the public in Japan, from the media. This needs to be discussed. People need to understand why it is so important that we take action. So we're looking to gear up activities in a big way in Japan and other countries over the next year. Any more? Okay, yes, sir.
How do you view a non-binding declaration instead of a ban?
Well, can I? Yep. At the Alliance for Multilateralism, France, Germany, and foreign ministers from about 20 other countries signed a declaration on killer robots. It wasn't a great declaration. It basically reiterates some principles that the Convention on Conventional Weapons had discussed. But for us, this was a roadblock in the way of the treaty, and now it's removed. So what's next is the question, because Germany promised us that such a declaration would be an interim measure, not the end of the road. That was the first time that such a group of high-level ministers had come together and acknowledged the killer robots threat alongside climate change, alongside girls' access to education. It's up there now with the most pressing multilateral issues affecting us. But political declarations, principles, promises of transparency, codes of conduct, we've heard this all before. For us, we need binding international law in the form of a new treaty. And once you get that treaty, it must be implemented at the national level, usually through some form of legislation too. This is what will be remembered in the decades to come, not the principles and the declarations and the other things. They sound nice, but it can be a kind of a time-wasting exercise, and we're very, very clear on what our goal is. All right. Yes, sir.
Sorry if I missed this, but who would you say, Benny Vansky from Fox News, who would you say are the three most advanced countries in this technology, and how hard do you think it's going to be able to get them on board?
The United States was first out the gate. That's abundantly obvious. China and Russia are also investing heavily in autonomous weapon systems, but there's far less transparency there. And then you have the robot nations, Israel, South Korea. So I did mention them at the beginning. I think the important thing to note, though, is we launched this campaign just in time, because there's no country that is vigorously advocating the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems. Even the countries who are investing, most of them will say, we have no plans to move down this path. And we're like, if you've got no plans to develop killer robots, then what's the problem with creating the treaty? So we believe the time is ripe, but very soon it will be too late, which is why there is a huge urgency to this and why we're impatient in civil society, always. But we're trying to help the governments by pushing them in the right direction here. Okay.
I'd like to add something. Sorry, Mary Wareham.
Okay.
Too late does not mean that the campaign to stop killer robots would stop working. Just as people and institutions and organizations have been working to get rid of nuclear weapons since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we would not sit pleasantly by and just say, oh dear. We would continue to work to stop the advance of killer robots.
So it's never too late to regulate.
To follow up on what you just said, you mentioned Turkey and Iran. You said maybe Turkey and Iran. Can you elaborate on that? Do you have information or just expectation? Thank you.
I mean, we're worried about the border between Turkey and Syria and how that is becoming increasingly automated. It's a very long border, and this is a challenge, I think, in other countries as well. We're not just concerned about the potential use of killer robots in armed conflict. What about policing, riot control, people crossing a border? There are many different circumstances in which such weapon systems will end up being used. There was also a disturbing article in a recent publication about Turkey investing in, was it swarm technology?
It was that they were already using swarming surveillance technology, but that they were advancing on the idea of using weaponized as well. That is extremely disturbing.
And so what I did was I wrote to Turkey and said, is this media article true? Is this really what you're trying to do here? And I'll let you know when I get a response. Any other? Okay. Any more questions? I don't want to suck up too much more time. That's okay.
In the third committee, which is what you're doing today, what are you seeking for them to do? Because obviously they deal with human rights.
We're actually at the first committee. Which
you're
is
at the disarmament committee.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes better sense. And you're promoting the resolution. Are you supporting the resolution that they've put forward?
There is currently no resolution on killer robots at this annual session of the General Assembly. It's simply a talk shop where we're looking to hear from governments who've not spoken on this topic yet, and we've heard from some this week. There are many countries who do not have representation in Geneva, who do not come to the CCW, many developing countries that we can reach here. So this is an outreach exercise for us, but we also want to tell you New York matters, and Geneva is failing on this. The CCW is failing. We're looking for another pathway, and this is potentially a key one, which is why we're talking to you today for the first time.
Would a resolution from the disarmament committee, which would then be adopted by the whole General Assembly, be welcomed?
It would depend on what it said. If it was another, wishy-washy, blah, 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 that had no teeth, it would be irrelevant. We really need to see binding international law. If it's a non-binding political declaration, that means I can do what I can sign it so I look good. And then when the circumstances warrant, I can use killer robots. And I just would like to point out that one of the first statements about killer robots was in the Human Rights Council.
Yeah.
Sorry, bouncing my glasses. Back in 2013.
Yep.
So while governments think that disarmament should be only in Geneva and the CCW and the CD, we believe that human rights councils, et cetera, have a lot to say about banning killer robots.
Perhaps the last question.
This is actually fairly quick. First of all, could you define for us technology-challenged folks what swarming technology means in this context? And secondly, could you just tell us the article or the media in which that article concerning
Turkey
Turkey
one.
appeared? Thank you.
I'll do that afterwards on Turkey. I don't know. Do you want to talk about swarms?
So swarm technology would allow for multiple discrete drones to communicate and collaborate on a shared objective. And this is very recently developed technology that would allow artificial intelligence to make predictions. Along those predictions would be, let's say, a game of capture the flag. So you set an objective, capture the flag, and the drones will work together and divide up tasks defensively and offensively to achieve that shared combination of goals.
US and China, we believe to be at the forefront of this development. And I have to say, it's one of the kind of potential killer robots that really concerns the public. There was a film called Slaughterbots a few years ago that an artificial intelligence expert made. Have a look for that on YouTube, and you'll see what we're talking about.
You're saying Turkey is using that, though, now
No.
on the border?
It was just an article. We're trying to determine how much of it was bluster and how much of it was real. So, but it's a good question for the Turkish ambassador. Okay. All right, we're done. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
The call to man. It's time to negotiations to ban killer robots.
That thing is amazing.
Stop #killer robots.